Hi everybody, my name's Kyla and today we're going to be making the Haitian Revolution. So before we get started, this dish takes about 13 minutes to cook. The ingredients that we're going to need to make this dish is 1 cup of free colored people, 1 cup of petite blancs, 1 cup of the slaves, 1.5 cup of the French, 1/2 cup of the Spanish, 1/2 cup of the British, 1.5 cup of Toussaint Louverture, 3/4 cup of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and then 3/4 cup of Napoleon Bonaparte. So, a little bit of background information on this dish is Haiti was originally named Saint-Domingue at the time. It had a very social structured and slave-based society, and the island is made up of 4 main groups. We have the Grand Blancs, who were the highest in society. They were made up of the plantation slave owners. Next, we had the free colored people, and these were people that were in the militia, and also they could own plantation slave owners. And by the way, they were former slaves. Next, we have the petite blancs, and these were made up of the farmers. And then lastly, we have the slaves. Now, the slaves were below everyone in society, and they endured hard labor. They had a very, very oppressive job due to the fact that they were producing a majority of France's income. They were responsible for making 40% of the world's sugar and 30% of the world's coffee, and they were very controlled by France. Many of the groups were unhappy with a lot of issues. For example, the Grand Blancs were unpleased that the French wanted to improve living conditions for the slaves. The free people of color didn't like that they were still being discriminated against. The petite blancs didn't like that people in society were getting better treatment than them. They felt like the free people of color shouldn't be able to own plantations and slaves. And then lastly, the slaves, of course, didn't like the harsh treatment that they were experiencing. Eventually, a rumor surfaced in Haiti saying that the French king had freed all the slaves, and this caused chaos throughout the whole island. So now that we've kind of establish some background information, we can get into how the dish is made. So our first step is we're going to put in 1 cup of the petite blancs into this bowl that we have over here. The petite blancs were very disturbed with this information that the slaves had been freed. They believed that everyone was getting better treatment than them, and they began fighting for colonial independence. They wanted to become a democracy. That way they could take the rights of every colored person on the island. And with this in mind, they seized the neighboring city of Port-au-Prince. So the next step is we're going to put in 1 cup of the free colored people into the bowl, and we're going to stir it up here. In 1971, the National Assembly granted free men of color with complete French citizenship, and the petite blancs were, of course, against this because here we go, the free people of color are getting better treatment, and this resulted in conflict between the 2 groups. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to put in 1 cup of the slaves into the bowl, and we're going to stir it up again. The slaves began to revolt against both of the groups because they believed that they were getting the worst treatment on the island, and they just felt like everything was unfair, which it was. They were still being used to provide the French with money, and they were still enduring harsh labor. They were being treated worse than everyone, not even human-like. In our next step, we're going to add in 1/4 cup of the French into our bowl here. During this time, the French were trying to stop the revolt, so they began attacking the slaves. In our next step, we're going to add in 1 cup of Toussaint Louverture, and this is our secret ingredient here. Toussaint Louverture is the most important ingredient in this dish. He was a leader of the slave revolt. He helped, from using previous knowledge of as a child, he was able to mold the slaves into becoming a highly skilled and disciplined army that was able to counter any of the attacks that the French gave. So he was very important. Our next step is we're going to add in 1/4 cup of the Spanish and 1/4 cup of the British into our bowl. And we're going to stir this all up some more. Now, Spain and Britain were really important, and they helped bring out the flavor of the slaves during this time. Spain helped aid and support the slaves, and they also worked to weaken the French, who they were already having conflict with. And then the British were also fighting against the French, and they even invaded Saint-Domingue, weakening the efforts of France even more. And luckily for the slaves, on February 4th, 1974, the slaves were freed because France just couldn't keep up with all the attacks from these three groups. So now that we finished combining all of our first portion of the revolution, we're going to get a pan here, and we're going to cook it in the oven. So we're just going to pour this out here and put it in the oven on boil for about 3 minutes. So our next step is we're going to be making the fight for independence. So we're going to add in a 1/2 cup of Toussaint Louverture, a 1/4 cup of Spain, a 1/4 cup of Britain, and then we're going to add in a 1/2 cup of France. So the fight for independence was different for Toussaint Louverture. He was originally in alliance with Spain, and he then switched alliances to the France. And during 1794 to 1802, Toussaint Louverture was successfully making efforts to grant the French colony Saint-Domingue with independence. So this was very exciting for him. In our next step, we're going to add in a 1/2 cup of Toussaint Louverture, and then we're going to add in a 1/2 cup of Napoleon Bonaparte. So Louverture passed the Constitution, and for a little while, Saint-Domingue was mostly tranquil until Napoleon Bonaparte seized power in France. And he threw Louverture in prison, where he later died, and he passed a new constitution stating that the laws did not apply to France's overseas colonies, which Saint-Domingue was a part of. And with his plans to reconstruct France's empire into North America, he needed money to do so, and so he decided that he needed to introduce slavery back into Saint-Domingue, which of course the slaves were not happy about. So let's get into our next step. We're going to add in a 1/4 cup of Napoleon Bonaparte, a 1/2 cup of France, a 1/2 cup of the slaves, and then we're going to add in 3/4 cup of Jean Jacques. So we can take the first part of the revolution out of the oven to cool in this pan right here. And let's talk about this step. A war occurs between the French and the former slaves in Saint-Domingue, but luckily Napoleon's army was actually, the majority of his army was killed due to a disease called yellow fever. So they ended up backing down, and this was great. All the island was celebrating. Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who took over for Toussaint after he was thrown into jail, declared Saint-Domingue independent, and he renamed it Haiti. So now we're going to place our creation very nicely, and it should come out looking like this. The Haitian Revolution